What's up, guys? Welcome back for another awesome episode. Today we have Tom Shepard. I just wanted to give you a quick heads up before we jump into the recording that between me and Tom, it was a little bit choppy. The Wi-Fi was all over the place, but I pulled some editing magic to put it together as smoothly as I possibly could. We do talk over each other at times, but just know that's due to the connection, not like we're trying to talk over each other intentionally. But at the end of the day, Tom gives really good long explanations on the topics that we go over. So the important stuff that's going to apply to you is unaffected. I apologize ahead of time for the lack of smoothness between us talking, but otherwise it's an awesome episode. Lots of great stuff to take away. So I hope you enjoy. Podcast where we simplify exercise and nutrition for busy parents 40 plus so they can improve their health and feel amazing. Today we have an awesome guest with us. We have Tom Shepard in the house. He is the head coach for Elite FTS. He's an author, educator, presenter, and also head coach for Tib Army as well. This guy is a huge name when it comes to strength training and knowing his stuff around pretty much all the topics surrounding getting stronger, feeling your best. And when it comes to performance, totally the guy to chat with. So I'm very happy to have you on today, Tom. Can't wait to pick your brain. So welcome. You're welcome.
That
I
bribe
accept
obviously
Venmo
did
and
its job.
PayPal.
Thank you for the great intro right there.
But I am really pumped that Andrew Coates initiated the conversation and got us connected. So Andrew, big thank you. And for everybody who is listening right now, as a thank you to him, go and check out Live Free and Diet Hard podcast after this one. So let's dive in a little bit, Tom. For those people that don't know, because I know Elite FTS is something that in the strength training world,
Sure.
extremely revered, extremely well known, but general population doesn't know much about it. So like, how would you explain your role in it and what exactly you do?
Yeah, sure. So Elite FTS were founded about 25 years ago by Dave Tate, who became famous in the strength training world by being at Westside Barbell, which is probably the most famous or infamous powerlifting gym strength training culture that there is. He wanted to found a company that sold equipment and gym apparel and things like that, but was also based around the tenets of live, learn, and pass on. The idea that he wanted to give back to the strength training community and help those who in the next generation of lifters and so on and so forth. So my wife and I came in a couple of years ago to help them broaden their education department in essence. So, we wrote articles for them. We've done a lot of instructional YouTube videos and Instagram content for them. We help run training events at their gym, whether it's helping Dave with his own training events or running our own. And then also I help co-host a lot of the podcast episodes. So we have a podcast there called Dave Tate's Table Talk, which is quite a big podcast within the strength training community. So it's allowed us to reach a much broader audience and help a lot more people, which has been great. It's been a fantastic experience being over here full time as well, and for the last 18 months or so. And it's just a new chapter for us in being able to help more people, which is really what we do this for at the end of the day. So
yeah,
and
that's awesome because I mean, I know when I was
far.
first getting into training, like Table Talk was one of the consistents where I'm like, got to listen to this every single week and get all my information, because it was one of the few where you could actually get really solid information. It was almost like the audio version of T Nation. So it was really helpful. But yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a really cool experience actually. Just being able to network and connect with the guests that we get in, in a way that you wouldn't be able to in any other context. Like you get to sit down for like 3 hours and just pick these people's brains, and a lot of the time when I'm prepping for them,
Yeah.
it's like, it's quite easy because it's like, well, what do I want to know? Like, I probably want to know the same stuff that everyone else does, right? So you get 2 or 3 hours with these people that, you've either like looked up to for a long part of your career or, have knowledge that you aspire to have because they've kind of gone down rabbit holes that you haven't. And part of your job is that you get to learn that stuff. So it's been a fantastic experience as a coach as well, to be able to get that kind of first-hand experience with other individuals who have been in this for so long.
Because I
and learned so
love like
much.
having guys like you on, or people that are very well educated on the topics, and then they have these crazy good filters to be like, okay, yeah, based on that, let's give it some context and see it from a different point of view. And you're just like, wow, that basically just blew my mind. So I hope that we have a few moments like that today. But before we do jump into any specific
Yeah, I
topics,
hope
I'd
so.
love to get a little bit of your backstory because I think it's really interesting seeing how people come into strength training because a lot of people have different paths that lead them here, more so than just getting jacked to get attention from the opposite sex. So, how did you stumble across like strength training and training at this level?
Yeah, sure. So my story is an interesting one. Well, I believe so anyway. So my first exposure to training was I was 15 years old. At that point, I'd been heavily anorexic for probably close to 2 years. Should we say anorexia as a side effect of depression is probably more accurate, whatever, it doesn't matter. And my eldest brother, who's about 10 years older than I am, came in my bedroom and literally threw a bag of whey protein on my bed. And it was it was made by a brand called PhD. I'll remember it till the day I die. It was like this white chocolate flavor. And it was the only thing at the time that I would eat, like calorie, like I'd drink one of those and it tasted so good to me that it's something I would actually eat. And he said, well, there you go. There's like, I don't know, 2 bags. It was like 10 pounds or something like that, right? And he said, you have that. You're going to take that 2 or 3 times a day, but you're going to come and train with me. He had a gym in his garage every day after school or 4 days a week, whatever. I'm going to make sure you have it. That was his way of reaching out and being like, look, I don't really understand what you're going through, but I can do this for you. To say I was there against my will was probably wrong. Like I enjoyed, even when I was, stick thing. I think at one point, I was like 128 pounds or something like that. Like my hair was falling out, my nails were nearly falling out from malnutrition. Like pretty rough stuff. But even at that point, I still wanted to like do press ups and crunch. Like I still wanted to train. I was just in a scenario where my body was falling apart. So he was making me do it in a more sustainable way, in a healthier way, and making sure that I actually had some kind of nutrition, even if it was the bare bones on top of that. So that was the start of, what at first maybe became an unhealthy obsession. I went from maybe one extreme to the other in that regards, where for a long time the training for me became very much a coping mechanism for what I was going through. Now, I would argue it was a very good coping mechanism, as in I had a lot worse coping mechanisms going on at that time. So if I didn't also have training, then I probably would have been considerably worse off. But I would definitely fell into that training addiction category where we can all probably talk about that. That's a negative thing to have. But in the context for me, it could have probably saved my life in that regard. Like I already have 6 suicide attempts in my past. Obviously, they were all unsuccessful. If it wasn't for training, who knows how high that number might have been. And probably at some point we would have, not been having this conversation because of that. So, context specific for me, the training addiction was a good thing. But once I started to get out of that rabbit hole and things started to get a little bit better, the training addiction for me very much stayed put. Now, it did set me off on a career that for me now is the most fulfilling and the best thing I've ever done with my life, short of marrying my wife. But the personal relationship with training was, should we say, reasonably negative for a long time. So I would say it's only been the last maybe like 6 or 7 years. So I probably spent half my training career, inverted commas, I would say having an unhealthy obsession with it, which came with positives and negatives. Like it made me a better coach because I wanted to try everything. Like I was going on T Nation reading every single article that they published. I was in the forums looking at every single post, bodybuilding.com, whatever. It didn't matter. Every training program, I was like, right, I got to do that one. I got to do that one. I had to pick it apart, see how it worked, test it on myself. It was probably terrible for my own results, but it taught me a lot. So I would like to think I pulled a silver lining from what wasn't maybe a negative relationship with training. But then I would say over the last 6 or 7 years, I've come to notice that I was always more of a coach than I was a lifter or an athlete anyway. Like I competed in powerlifting for 7 or 8 years. I never enjoyed the process of it. I had reasonable success with it. Still was never the strongest person in my house, thanks to my wife, who squats 600 at 148 pounds as you do. So I'm strong enough to spot her at least. Yeah, I know, right? So when I stepped away from competing and started to treat training as a tool for becoming a better coach, like experimenting with things, finding out new methods that maybe work with my athletes and stuff like that. That was actually when I really started to enjoy it more. And that's ultimately what's led me to have a much better relationship with training. So I think, sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. I'm sorry, but I think it's quite cool for people to really dive down into why do you train? And it's something that I like to ask all the clients that I work with, because, if you and I were just sat in the gym or whatever, the answer you would give me probably isn't 100% the truth. It might not be a straight up lie, but it's also probably not the entire truth. You say like, oh, I just want to look a bit better. Whereas the real answer is like, oh, I used to get bullied for being the fat kid at school, or I have these insecurities. It doesn't matter, right? There's usually a layer below that we don't talk about. And I just think that is something that everyone should dive into, ideally early on in their training career, just because if you really dive down into that, you can go, well, cool. If that's what I'm actually in this for, then that changes the whole landscape of what my training has to be. If you're just in this because you're like, hey, I just want it as a stress relief, which there's zero wrong with that. I don't know why that gets kind of demonized in a way. Then cool. There is no exercise you have to do. There is no training program you have to do. You have carte blanche to do whatever relieves your stress the most. Whereas, if you're a guy who's like, or lady, whatever, who's like, I just want to get as jacked as possible. Cool. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Then that means you just go for that. Don't let anyone else determine your goals for you, which I think all of us fall into a little bit at times. Like for me, it was competing. I thought that if I had to be a well-recognized strength coach, then I must compete. I have to walk the walk for my entire career to be respected. When in truth, it made me miserable. And the sooner I stepped away from it, the better everything got. But I didn't really even know I was doing that until
Yeah.
I kind of dug down into like, why do I keep doing this to myself? And then eventually that became very clear when I asked that. So, if I had one piece of advice for everyone, is that there is no such thing as a bad goal. It's your goal. And if it motivates you consistently, that's cool. Like if you get into the gym just because you want to look better on your vacation or you want to look better naked, like that's fine. If it gets you in the gym, you're in the gym. That is the battle almost won straight away. And often the thing that gets you in the gym is not the thing that keeps you in the gym. Longer term, then your goals can develop. But if that, some people might say that it's like a shallow goal or something like that. Who cares? If it gets you through the front door and gets you enjoying the process, gets the habits formed, then
Yeah. No, you
who is losing here? I don't understand,
no, I am so glad
And I'm aware
you first
that, so I
off, like I really
apologize.
appreciate you sharing all that. And second, I'm glad that you took it to that level because it opened up a lot of things that honestly I haven't even thought about for a long time. Where I love how you talked about the whole like just getting in there for whatever reason, because I think online it's very easy to get caught up in these people saying you should do it for this reason, you should do it for that reason, when it's like it doesn't really matter what they think. It's whatever you think that gets your butt in there. And for a lot of people, vanity is plenty to get your ass in the door and it can lead to really good things. But I mean, like for me in particular, I did it for vanity, then for football, then like my cousin had a asthma attack that led him to be like his heart stopped for a few minutes and he became a quadriplegic, and dealing with that grief and that basically loss is what it shifted towards. And let me tell you, talk about amazing workouts. Holy crap. I was like maxing out all the time and hitting it. But then it shifted towards other things. It's like bodybuilding, then powerlifting, but it's like you're always rediscovering that goal. And I think that's a really good thing to bring up, which is like being open to trying for a different reason.
Yeah, for sure. And again, vanity inherently, just the word has negative connotation, right? If we all, everyone who's listened to this, if we were all sat down and we said, hey, do you want to look worse? Who's going to put their hand up? No one. Like everyone has some level of vanity, and that's fine. That's just human nature. Like it's the reason I gelled my hair before I came on this podcast, right? It's the reason that we shave in the, it doesn't matter. Like we all have it to some degree. Now, for some of us, that level of vanity also goes, okay, well, if you want to look a certain way, maybe you need to train. Cool, go do it then. Some kind of physical fitness training, whatever. We're built to move. We're built to do stuff. We have just invented training because our regular lifestyle doesn't tick that box anymore, right? We're not out hunting and gathering and carrying things, right? Really, everyone should train. I don't care what it is, but everyone should do something. Whether that's running or hiking or swimming or lifting weight, I don't really care. But the human body is made to do something physical. So if that vanity is what gets you in the gym or out running, whatever it might be, and gets you ticking that box every day and feeling better and enhances the rest of your life, then cool, be as vain as you want. Like the outcome there
Exactly,
just
because it
justifies
can lead
any
to very
means
positive
necessary,
things.
in
I
my
know one of the
opinion, at
biggest
least.
things I see working with a lot of people is that you start just by working out, and then it shifts into, okay, I feel really good. How do I feel even better? And then you start talking about nutrition, then you start talking about stress management, and then all these things lead to a more positive outcome and a better quality of life. So it's like it opens so many positive doors.
Yeah, it does. And I think it sounds like a really stupid thing to say as a strength coach, but for me, the biggest benefits of training are not contained within the gym at all. But on your point there, like you say how it kind of creates a snowball effect. And I was having this conversation with a client just yesterday, actually, so that's why I mentioned this. But a lot of people aren't aware of how good they can feel. Like if you've only ever been like a 4 out of 10, then to you, that's your ceiling. Like that for you, that's 10 out of 10 because you've just never been higher than there. You go through your life every day feeling a 4 out of 10. And then all of a sudden you start working out, or maybe you start going out for your daily walks and getting more sunlight or more social engagement, whatever. And all of a sudden you're at a 5 and you're like, oh, this is cool. It wasn't even on my radar that I could feel like this. And then you're like, well, if I've gone from a 4 to a 5 and now I feel like this, I wonder what else is out. What else could get me to a 6 or whatever it might be? And then it just opens up doors, or at least the possibility and the thought process in your head that like it doesn't have to be this way. Like even if you are content now and happy now, what's to say you couldn't be even happier? You just don't know until you do it. And for me, like the training side is the easiest place for people to make that initial step because you get that instant gratification. Like how often have you felt worse for doing a
Well, assuming
workout?
you're doing the
I
right
mean, it's
type of
almost never,
workout.
right? Like you
Assuming you're
get
not
that
like
instant like,
killing
oh, I'm
yourself
glad I
and
did
you're
that.
like, I
Like,
have to do it this way.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But like even, sometimes even those grueling ones for an hour or two after, you're like, I
That's
proved to
true.
myself I survived it. You get like the survival high in that scenario. Maybe you pay the price a little bit later on when you don't quite feel so good then. But there's this initial endorphin rush and everything. The science doesn't matter. You feel good. And you're like, cool. There's that instant positive reinforcement. Now, when it comes to the nutrition or that type of thing, you don't really get that. Like you don't eat healthy for a day and wake up being like, oh man, I should have done this years ago. There that's a slow burn. So the training at least gives you that initial impetus of like these positive impacts happen and I just have to put the work in. And then once you've got that, you're kind of building a habit on top of a habit. Like for most of us, it's very easy, especially if you're like got careers, you've got young kids, all this type of thing. It feels like your whole life is this scatterboard of chaos. So like if we get training dialed in, like then we just start organizing this tiny little corner over here. Like that's our training. That all of that is chaos. But now we've got this little corner, like I've got that dialed in. And now you have a starting point. Like when you just have chaos, where do you start? You don't, right? You just don't know. Whereas now I've got something to build on. Like, cool. I'm training 3 days a week. Now I'm just going to make sure that I have a protein shake after I train, or I'm going to make sure that I go to bed early enough the day before I train so that I feel good when I get up from my 6 a.m. workout, whatever. And slowly that tiny little corner just branches out and out and out until eventually all of a sudden all that chaos is organized and structured in a way that is all pushing towards you feeling better as opposed to just bedlam at all times. So that's to me is why if I had to say do one thing, it would be the training, just because in general it leads to the longest, most sustainable change and acts as that kind of pinball effect then onto everything else. Whereas you don't always see the opposite. Like people who change their diet and things like that, if even if they do stick with it, you don't often get that cascade
Absolutely.
that
I mean,
follows on
you
from it. At least
honestly
in
like
my experience,
you
anyway.
start to see people's story and their identity change about themselves, where it's like how you were saying a lot of people don't understand how good feels. Like when you go from being that person that's always like, yeah, my lower back's always stiff, or like, I'm really like low energy, I need that fifth, sixth coffee, to the person that's like, man, I feel freaking amazing all day, every day, or like for most days, you're just like, you become a totally different person and you start falling in line with the things that those types of people do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I said earlier that like the biggest benefits for me of training are not contained in the gym. And, that to me cannot be made or stressed enough to people. Like, first off, you've got just the self confidence that comes with being able to do challenging workouts and see progress, like being able to get to the point where you can do things that you genuinely just couldn't do 3 months ago. Like, when's the last time the average adult who doesn't train learned or was gained an ability to do something that they just could not do 3 months ago? You know, it could be learn to play an instrument or, you know, learn a language or whatever. Like, most of us aren't improving ourselves. Whereas you get in the gym, you're like things can, positive changes can happen, right? So it creates that self-confidence there. And, you know, most workouts, there's going to be that glimmer where you're like, either A, I don't think I can get through this today, depending on the type of workout. Or there's B, where it's like, oh, I'm just not feeling this. Like, I could just go home and watch Devil May Cry on Netflix. That's what I'm watching right now. That's why I said that. You know, in either of those scenarios, you got the little angel and devil, and you go, no, I invariably you make it through the workout. You know, you survive it, or you make yourself finish it, whatever. Well, then you just got to win. Okay, it's a small win, but how do you expect to handle like the big problems you have in your life if you can't handle the little problems? Like, the little problems are important. And if the gym is the place where you start winning those little battles, then great. Then when you get home, maybe you make yourself a proper dinner as opposed to reaching for whatever's in your, like pizza in your fridge or whatever, right? Like, you start stacking these little wins on top of each other, and that creates momentum and self-confidence. And all of a sudden, you have this belief that, like, you know, if I want to achieve something, I can. I just, you know, I can have what I want. I just have to put the work in. But I have now illustrated to myself that I am capable of stacking these little wins and creating that change in my life. So if I can do it in the gym, what's to say I can't be a better husband or a better parent or a better colleague? You know, whatever it is, like, it just again opens up all those possibilities to people that, like, we are not set in our ways. Like, we are very plastic, malleable individuals, and we can, you know, if we're not careful, that can get pushed one way and make us a worse version of ourselves. But with conscious effort, we also have huge scope to push ourselves in the other direction as well, you know. And that, to me, is what the gym does. It gives you confidence in stacking wins. It shows that you're able to commit to a structure, and, you know, it gives you back the belief in delayed gratification, because again, delayed gratification is something that we don't have a lot of in our current society. You know, like, hey, you want something cool, Amazon Prime's on your doorstep at 5 a.m. the next day. You know what, it's everything's one click away. It doesn't matter what it is, you know, it's pretty much one click. So, like, the gym is a place where you can't shortcut that. It's like, hey, cool, if you want that, you know, you want bigger legs or you want that stronger squat, whatever, like, okay, 3 to 6 months, whatever it's going to take, there is no shortcut, you know. And unfortunately, we get sidetracked there because that's what marketing and stuff does. But the cold, harsh truth is there is no shortcut. When you've been doing this really, really well or hard for 10 years, that's when people start asking you what your secret is. And the answer is always really disappointing, unfortunately, for them. So it gives you back that belief that, like, okay, I can achieve X, Y, or Z, but I have to go in with the hard work now with absolutely no promise of reward, and just believe that it's going to happen. And I apologize, this is getting too philosophical, right? But, like, we all wait around for some kind of guarantee, right? Like, we'll watch the Super Bowl and be like, yeah, well, you know, I'd train twice a day if I knew I was going to be a Super Bowl player. You know, I was going to get to the Super Bowl. But, like, the difference is all those players put in the work with absolutely no promise that they were going to be a professional football player or get to the Super Bowl. They did it anyway. And on a smaller scale, maybe a less, you know, dramatic, luxurious scale, if, you know, you have to go in and do the work with no promise, because, you know, probably all the meaningful, fulfilling things in your life that you have right now have come from a very long journey, arduous journey of hard work, grit, determination, suffering, whatever. And you probably didn't absolutely know it was going to pay off at any point right up until it did. And, you know, the gym and your training is no different. And that just acts as a conduit to make us realize that again. And we can go, okay, well,
Exactly.
you know,
And
if
to your
that
point
works
with the
here,
whole
why would it
guarantee
not
thing,
work
I
out
mean,
there?
we're in a place
You know?
now where it's like we have the science, we have the proof to be like, if you do this, this will improve. Like, if you hit the gym, if you hit the gym consistently and you haven't before, you're going to build muscle. You're going to have denser bones. You're going to reduce cancer risk. You're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. So it's like we have guarantees. We just got to embrace the fact that we're doing it more so than for fitting
Mm-hmm.
into a specific type of clothes, or we're doing it to like look a certain way and have abs. It's like there's a lot of benefits to be had. We just got to embrace the right ones, and the others will come as like a side effect.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't, again, like we say, it doesn't really matter what your initial motivator is. There are so many ways of marking progress. Like, okay, your goal might be to get into a pair of jeans or like lose X amount of weight, whatever. But along the way to that goal, I guarantee if you look, there's a lot of other progress being made. Now, it could just be from a habitual standpoint, like, hey, you didn't miss a workout for a month. Maybe you've never done that before. Maybe you've improved your mobility or your movement quality. Maybe now when you're walking up the 10 flights of stairs or whatever to your office, you don't get tired when you do that. Maybe now you can pick up your kid in the garden and pick them up over your head and carry them. There are millions of things out there that you can probably look at with a fine tooth comb and go, that's better, or maybe that wasn't even there at all before. So I would, I do think having goals is important. It clearly is, but I also think people overinvest in them a little bit to the point where they detract from the process. If we can get ourselves more involved in the process of enjoying it, but also bringing forth the best quality work that we can do. So the way that I would sum this up is, imagine you were a fly on the wall watching your own workout. What would you say about yourself? Like, would you go, oh man, he's a bit lazy, he's like answering emails between, or whatever? Or would you be the fly on the wall and go, damn, someone's working hard? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a time and a place definitely to talk about taking pride in the work that you do. And again, I would like to think that bleeds out into everything else you do, because we can all stack up workouts. Like, gyms are full of people training 3 days a week and not missing a workout, but many of them are not making progress because the effort or the quality of the work they're doing is not good enough. And again, the gym is another place that teaches us quantity cannot make up for quality. And that should be the same in everything else you do, whether it's your work, at your career, or your time with your kids or your significant other. You can have all the time together you want. If you're playing on your phone or not really there all the time, it doesn't matter. And it's the same. Like, you might spend 6 hours a week in the gym, but what are you doing for 6 hours? So the goal is important, but if we focus on the process and go like, what is the best quality work I can bring to my workouts, that I would be proud to say that workout belongs to me, I executed that again will lead to the results in the long term anyway, but also makes them more fulfilling because you're more present to experience the workout that you're having. And it's kind of like,
We love
and
going
again, this is
down
far too
these rabbit
philosophical,
holes
so I
on this
apologize.
podcast.
When we're more mindful of what we're doing, it's like, your mind is like a Polaroid camera, right? If you're not particularly mindful, not particularly present, maybe it's taking a photo like every 5 minutes or whatever. So like at the end of your day, you've got X amount of photos to sum up for your day. So your workout, you might only get like 6 or 7 photos, right? To look back on and be like, oh, that was cool. If you're more mindful, that, your Polaroid camera is churning those pictures out maybe every 2 minutes or 1 minute, whatever. You have more things to appreciate. You've got more photos at the end of the day to look back on and go, I did a lot of cool stuff today, you know? And again, I love that the gym, you might get that 1 hour. Well, that 1 hour is yours. Like, nothing else in the world exists right now. What is the best thing you can do with this hour? And again, personally, I like to think that bleeds out then hopefully into everything else you do, because you get instant rewards. When that quality of work goes up, you get more results. And it's a very easy and objective thing to see when you get stronger or your lifts improve or maybe you gain more muscle, whatever it might be. It's very hard to objectify, am I being a better colleague, am I being a better husband, or whatever, but the same
Yeah,
mindset
I
still
love
carries
all
over
of
to
that.
those
I mean,
results in the
I
long
want to
term.
keep going in this direction because we do love that for this podcast for sure. But I definitely want to get into the training a little bit because I know that there's a lot of people listening that are probably going to get jazzed up by this
Of course.
conversation, be like, okay, I want to hit the gym. But I know one of the big things I hear as far as like pushback goes is not trying to get super bulky, but definitely want to experience what it feels like to be strong. So, like, if somebody did want to go this route and say, listen, I want to get strong as hell, I want to be like your wife squatting 600 pounds, but not trying to get like super bulky, what would you say to them?
Okay, so there's two avenues to go down here. I'll go down this one first, and then we'll go down the what training would look like. So the reality is, for most who are saying like, I don't want to get too bulky or I don't want to get bigger, we interpret that as I don't want to get any more muscular. And maybe they even think that too. But really, what they're talking about a lot of the time is that it's a lot more literal than you think, in that I don't want to take up any more space. My body consumes enough space. Okay, that's fine. But most of us have a lot less muscle than we think. And what I mean by this is, you take the average person who wants to, they have a theoretical ideal of like body fat percentage they want to be at. You ask them, how much weight do you think you need to lose to achieve said body fat percentage or said look? On average, you're going to have to add about 50 to 100% to whatever number they say to get even remotely close to how much weight or fat they actually need to lose. And I'm not saying this to be depressing, although the truth kind of is a little bit depressing. For that, I apologize. So the reality is, like, most of us are carrying a lot less muscle than we think. It's actually very common for people to end fat loss phases before they're at their goal, because they're like, dude, I just feel too small. Like I look too small, I look too slim or whatever. And I get that. That's totally fine. So I'm not saying to people like you should all go on a fat loss phase and get really lean. But what I am saying is that don't underestimate how much fat you're carrying, but also how different you can look at the same weight or a very similar weight if we are to go through those phases where first we get a little bit leaner and then we gain a bit more muscle. Like for most of us, if we did that a couple of times, like, lose 10, gain 10, lose 5, gain 5, whatever, in a sensible manner, we'd be amazed at how different we can look and feel at roughly the same body weight. And then all of a sudden you don't become as scared of, gaining some more muscle, because you're actually like, okay, I don't have as much as I thought. There's more fat there to lose than I thought. Also, I can float around this weight or even maybe a little bit lighter and look really and feel really good. So that would be the first caveat I would just put out there as like a thought experiment to people, is just, I get that you don't want to be any bigger in terms of total volume, but what about what your current physique is made of? There's probably a lot of room for tweaking there. Now, if we're looking at training from the aspect of just wanting to be stronger, now, hypertrophy does play a role. Like getting more muscle helps. The bigger the engine in your car, the faster it can go, all else being equal. But it is by far not the only way to get stronger. We have the whole realm of like neurological nervous system based adaptations that we can create there that allow us to get stronger. This is why, for example, like Olympic weightlifters, for example, can be not particularly muscular, but create huge amounts of force and lift incredibly impressive weights. There's going to be a technique development side. So, how skillful are you at the lifts that you want to get stronger on? There is no upper ceiling to technical development. Me and Dave, when we have these train your ass off events like that, we've had people who've been lifting for 15, 20 years get absolutely torn apart in a day. Being like, I thought I knew how to squat. We've genuinely had 700-800 pound squatters come here and be like, I didn't even know how to brace, for example. There's always this universe of technical improvements that you can make, most of which you may not even be aware of, that are going to make you stronger, first off. So like there's a big element of kind of the mastery of your craft there. Then on the more pure physiological side of things, there's a lot that we can do to just get more out of the musculature that we have now. For example, when we're training in those higher percentages, so for strength development, we're generally looking at a minimum of 80% of your 1 rep max and above. More pure strength development would be more like 85% and above. 90% and above does play a role, but you also generally can't tolerate those kind of ranges for very long, all else being equal. So if you want to be stronger, most of your time should probably be spent in the 80 to 90% range, with like short bouts in the 90% plus range to kind of peak the strength that you have. But for many, that may not really be needed. Like if you're not going to test your strength, or you don't have a competition or anything like that, there's probably not that much benefit to going outside of that range, unless you just want to, because lifting heavier is cool, right? And again, as we kind of discussed already, there's nothing wrong with that. Really going above, let's say 92% to be a bit more specific, like, is not really needed for the average person who doesn't want to like test, like, how much can I lift for like a 1 or a 2 rep max, or doesn't have a type of competition. Like, there is a difference between building strength and displaying or peaking strength. Peaking is what we do to create the best possible outcome for a test or a competition. But during those times, what we're really doing is learning to display the strength we already have. So we're not, in the strongest sense of the term, we're not really getting stronger as such. So if you want to lift heavier in those rep ranges and those percentages, cool. There's nothing wrong with that. Lifting heavier is cool. We all appreciate that. But just be aware that for the average person, it's not really building anything. It's kind of just showing you what you're capable of right now based on the structure and the system that you've created. So all else being equal, you're going to want to spend most of your time in like the 80 to 90% range, which is going to then mean that your reps are going to be on the lower side. Now, exactly what that is going to be dependent on how like explosive you are naturally. When you put a question down on when we were talking about the differences between men and women, one of the big ones that's really interesting is when we're looking at women as a general sense, they tend to be more slow twitch fiber dominant than men do. So they're naturally a little bit less explosive, which means when they're performing repetition work with percentages, they can generally get a higher number of reps at the same amount. If you give 80% to the completely average guy and the completely average woman, the woman will generally get more reps because of that. For example, like for me, I'm not many things, but I am very explosive. Like if you put 90% on the bar for me, I might get two if I'm lucky, if it's a really good day. Now, my wife, Naomi, when her max raw squat was like
And here
440 or
here I am,
whatever,
like
a few years ago
I'm just
now,
like, I
her
know I'm like
best
a
AMRAP at
grinder when
90%,
it
I think
comes
was
to like,
11,
if I
was
get into
maybe
90s,
12.
I could probably squeak out 6, 7, or
Yeah.
8, and it'll be the
Like I wouldn't
slowest thing
even,
ever, and it'll be a dogfight the whole way. But 12, jeez.
yep. Yep. Yeah, that was not much else happened that session or that day actually for them. But that just puts in a point there that like when we say 80 to 90%, that might be very different depending on how naturally explosive you are. Like we said, all else being equal, women can generally get more reps at the same percentage because of that slower twitch fiber dominance. Also, they have better pain tolerance than men. So they can generally grind out more reps more easily, and they're okay to recover from that because having a higher amount of estrogen is actually neuroprotective in many regards. So
So
they can generally
so the
handle
takeaway is
more
that
volume at a higher intensity. Again, all
the
else being
ladies are
equal,
way, way,
because estrogen helps
way
protect their
stronger
nervous
than
system
us,
from that.
or
So just a
more
caveat
pain
there
tolerant
for
for
the
sure.
percentages, but that's where you're going to want to spend.
Exactly.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, we should be grateful for that, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to put up with us for the most part. But I mean, go look at Open Powerlifting, which is like the database where they compile every powerlifting comp and lifter or whatever. Look at the top 20. You know, I think last I checked, it was like 14 or maybe 15 females. Like, no, none of us should be surprised by this anymore. That's all I'm saying. You know, um, so you want to spend most of your time, like 80 to 90%. For me, lower rep ranges means in general, like 5 and below. Sure, you could do more, like especially if you're slow twitch fiber, and your females will get a little bit more, as we already discussed. But for me, then the issue becomes how many good reps can you actually do? Even if it's like 70%, most people will get like 3 or 4 reps, and then stuff just starts to degrade, right? It's concentration, attention to detail, it's breathing, it's bracing. All of these things that are nuanced beyond just X amount of weight for X amount of reps means the quality of the work goes down. So I would say stick to more submaximal sets and do more of them. Like there's plenty of studies out there now that yes, if you want hypertrophy, you want muscle gain, going close to failure is extremely important. If you can do all the volume you want, if you're nowhere near failure, you're not going to get very far. But for strength and performance gain, there is no benefit to going close to failure, especially when we're talking like axially loaded, on weight on your spine type movements. And the reason for that is we're not dealing with hypertrophy that requires that ultimate mechanical tension. Once we have 80% on the bar, this is too nerdy and I apologize in advance. Once you have 80% on the bar, you have full fast twitch fiber recruitment. So all the motor units, all the muscle fibers in your muscle are recruited if you have 80% on the bar. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, give or take, but in general, that's going to be it. So we're already stimulating all the fibers we need. We don't need to push close to failure to get that. Now it's a case of how many good quality repetitions can I get with all of those muscle fibers working for me? Now, when we start going at higher percentages, or like say we get to rep 3 or rep 4 with 80% on the bar, we need to remember that it's not 80% anymore. If say you fatigue at 3% a rep, right? Well, then on the third rep, it's 86%. And on the fourth rep, it's 89%. So from a nervous system standpoint, we can still train 90% with 80% if we do it for the correct number of reps, if that makes sense. That's where we start getting the other adaptations coming in, which basically is going to be, you've got all your fibers recruited. So now how do I produce more force? Then we're looking at increasing firing rate. So that's basically how fast those muscle fibers can contract and twitch. Like the little actin, myosin cross bridges, how well they can cycle and make those muscle fibers contract. That's where you start to get those improvements, which we could get by just putting 90% on the bar and doing sets of 1 or 2, or we could put 80% on the bar and go to say like 3 or 4 reps from failure, depending on how fast twitch fiber that person is. So there's probably no need to go closer than 2 reps to failure, because even then you're still going to get those side benefits there, right? So it can be that simple. What you should be kind of focusing on at that point is, how do I accumulate enough workload with good technical execution? Which, go back and look at how like the old time strongmen, and back in the 70s and stuff like that, before steroids kind of like polluted the entire fitness industry. And I'm not judging, I don't care like about steroid use, but what I say is it does change what good training looks like. We can't debate that. We go back to that era where the average strongman was also like competing in Olympic weightlifting, and was a circus strongman, and all these people were just doing all this cool stuff with really basic kit. They treated their training like practice. Take the circus strongman. They've got to be able to just pick up that Thomas Inch dumbbell or do that bent press or whatever, like at the drop of a hat, like in front of a crowd a dozen times a day, or whatever. So you practice and you get so good, you get to the point where you can go and lift 80% cold if you have to. Like, I'm not saying you should do that, but what I'm saying is they treated their training like practicing their craft. So they they needed to be just heavy enough that it gave them the right feel, but it was never done to the detriment of how the rep was executed. And I think that's where the most people will go wrong, is that they'll take those squat sets and it's like, okay, 5x5 at 80%. But like half of those 25 reps are not squats. They're good mornings, or they're something else. They're not great. And that is going to limit you long term, not just in terms of your technical development, but also, if we're talking the ability to display strength in a certain exercise, every rep that we do that isn't, should we say, the good habit or the good pattern, is reinforcing the bad pattern. And it's taking us further away from where we want to be, right? So accumulating volume at 80 to 90% is going to be a huge part of what's going to get you stronger. In the short term, higher frequency will also help, because if you want to learn how to execute a lift, like anything, doing it more frequently is going to be the king. If you wanted to play guitar, you wouldn't pick it up for once a week and just do it until your fingers were bleeding and it sounded awful. You'd pick it up 3 or 4 times a week, play for half an hour, whatever. As soon as all the quality started to go and you couldn't recognize Stairway to Heaven anymore, you would stop. Your lift should be the same. Like, if things start to degrade, maybe that's a sign that today is done. But if you want a lift to get better, all else being equal, practicing it more often will be very beneficial. Now, the kind of last bracket I would look at for getting people stronger would be, we have like inbuilt safety mechanisms. So you have these things called Golgi tendon organs that sit at the end of your muscle fiber where the tendon attaches, and they are basically sensing the amount of force or tension that's going through that area. The idea is that, funny enough, your body doesn't want you to tear a tendon. They're kind of important, right? But we can override them. Like adrenaline, for example, will override those Golgi tendon organs, which is why you see the stories of like, mom picks up back of car to save baby. Like, it can happen. If there's enough adrenaline present, the body will just go, doesn't matter if we tear something, this needs to happen, whatever it might be, right? Now, I'm not saying you need to go rev yourself up and put yourself in a dangerous position, but the other way we can do that safely is lifting like super maximal loads. So that means, if your 1 rep max is 200 pounds, lifting anything over 200 pounds will help desensitize those Golgi tendon organs, which means you get given a higher percentage of the force that you're able to produce anyway. Like, the average person who's never lifted a weight probably can only produce about 30% of the force that they're capable of. And then we're looking at, like Olympic level weightlifters and very high performing athletes. They might be up at 80 or 90% of their genuinely max force production. So for, most of us who are flitting in and out of the gym, we're probably only able to display like maybe 50% of the force that we're genuinely capable of. So most of us have a lot of room to improve there, which is what we can do with those super maximal loads. Now, the cool thing is that we don't have to lift them through full ranges or anything like that. I mean, in theory, we can't, right? But, partial ranges of motion, even like heavy holds and supports, like unrack the bar, bend your elbows, lower it an inch and hold. Or, set up safety pins or whatever and press off that, or squat up off the pin, do the top half only, whatever. That's going to have a genuine physiological effect on your ability to produce really high end amounts of force. And cool thing is, it's probably going to get you a stronger core and an upper back, and all the muscles that are not prime movers but are responsible for supporting the loads that you move through that lift are all going to get stronger because they're under more load. It doesn't matter, you're not going through the full range of motion. Time under tension is going to be the main thing there, and it's going to be a confidence builder. Like if you have already put 220 230 pounds on your back, several times and done AMRAPs with pin squats or whatever, and your max squat is 200, well, then guess what? When you put 205 on your back, it's not going to be so intimidating. Like you have more than enough postural and structural strength to deal with that load. And when you're in racket, you can be like, cool, I've lifted 10% more than this. Maybe that's the biggest benefit to be had from it. I would argue the rest is also really important, but quite often when it comes to like maxing out a weight, how you feel when you first unracked it kind of determines whether you've won or lost already, So even just from that mentality viewpoint, it can be extremely helpful there. So that would be the other avenue that I don't see many people going down, because they think of it maybe as glory lifting, like ego lifting, like, oh, sure, it's only half the range of motion, but it genuinely plays a role. Obviously, there's a way to program it sensibly and execute it sensibly. Like if you're doing deadlifts from, your knee and your back looks like this, so you can put an extra 90 pounds on the bar, that's not doing what we need it to do. Like we need to have the same body positions, the same joint angles, the same prime movers that we have in the full lift to make sure we get the carryover. But those partial lifts and those heavier lifts are going to have a very big role if we're looking at pure strength development. And again, if we go back to say like the 70s and before, partial lifts and overloaded lifts were a huge part of their training. Half their training was like perfect technical execution, and then the other kind of half to a third was, how can I lift the heaviest stuff humanly possible, which was primarily partials and all those type, or like strategic cheating. Like if you're doing a military press, they would do push press instead because it would allow them to handle more load and get used to that. So there's definitely a
Yeah.
huge role for
Now,
that in
two
people's
big
training.
points,
Maybe
people, that
not
I
in the
got
beginner
out
stage,
of
but
all
once you're at
that.
those
Number one,
intermediate
if your
levels,
eyes glossed
that's something that
over
I see
during all
not
those
nearly enough people
percentages,
taking
get
advantage
yourself
of.
a coach. Okay. If you're a dad that always maxes out and hurts themselves, get a coach. And if you're a woman who wants to lift heavier but can't get themselves to do it, get yourself a coach. Okay. So those were the one big thing.
I mean, I think the cool thing about having a coach, like I very often hire a coach for other like I don't hire one for my training because my training is like I'm my own guinea pig. I'm experimenting with stuff, right? But when it's nutrition and all this other stuff, like it helps you be objective. Like it's very, very hard to be objective about yourself, about anything. Never mind when we're talking about, should we say, often subjects that are emotionally charged. Like if we're talking about like body image and relationships with food, like a lot of that carries a lot of emotional baggage for people, right? And that's fine. But that also means that you probably can't be objective. Like if you're someone who like stops their diet plan because they don't look a certain way in the mirror or something like that, or they had a bad workout and now they want to just start a new training program, like these are all things that are very normal to experience emotionally, but also probably mean that you at least need someone to check you on this stuff. Maybe that's hiring a coach, or maybe you've got a partner who also trains who can just kind of check you on it and say, dude, like, come on, just relax, it's one bad workout or whatever. You ate one pizza, whatever, just get back to it. Like someone to just put things back into perspective with you, I think is really important there. But if you want to be successful in the gym long term, there is definitely a certain level of education everyone needs to have. You need to learn what the good movement patterns are. You need to learn the basics of programming. And I'm not saying you need to get a degree in this stuff, but know what percentages are, know what the different percentages do, know what a sensible program does and does not look like. Just because then you don't end up getting caught up into BS programs that aren't going to get you anywhere for a start. But also, it's easier to be bought into a process when you understand how a process works. Like, you might be going through this program and be like, I don't feel any stronger right now. But maybe you're not meant to. Maybe this is a phase where your volume is just going up and up and up and up and up. And you're just carrying a lot of cumulative fatigue. And then guess what? The next training block, all that volume is going to go down. You're going to shed that fatigue and your weights are going to go. But if you don't know anything about programming, you have no idea what's on the horizon, and you feel like throwing in the towel when perhaps you're just on the cusp of actually seeing the benefits of your hard work. So it's just, you don't want to be blind on your own journey. Sure, it's great to have guidance. They help. It's like the bumpers when you go bowling, right? Which I need. Okay, they keep you on the straight and narrow in the right direction, but you should still know enough to know which direction you should be going and what the path roughly looks like, just for your own benefit in terms of your mental health, your confidence, and so you know what's coming your way. We wouldn't want to go into work every day having absolutely no idea what's coming tomorrow or next week or next month. We want to go in and have a rough idea what our day is going to look like, but the training is the same thing. Why is this here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you're someone who does have a coach, in my opinion, your coach should be more than happy to go over that with you, because they should be educating you, in my opinion, because the best thing a coach can do is to have a client turn around one day and say, thank you so much. I actually feel confident enough that I can go out on my own and get some pretty good results on my own now, because you have shown me the way to do this. That should be the ultimate goal of a coach, in my opinion. And, that's got to come a little bit from the client too, where if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get
Exactly.
the right
And
answers. So
yeah, that
there's
I
a
couldn't have said it better
important part of
myself. And then
having the right
the
two-way
other thing I wanted
relationship
to
there
touch
and
on
knowing
too,
what
I
questions
know
to
we're
ask
running
from your
over a
coach
little bit
also.
on time, and I'm super appreciative of you sticking with me. It's good for me too. So we could dive into this a little bit. But as you were going through all these concepts that you were going through, I'm just like, these are
It's fine for
really
me.
similar to the things that kids really need to focus on too. Like, for example, I'm not sure which country it is. I want to say Russia, but when they have Olympic lifting up to a certain age, it's not about how much weight they lift, it's about how good their technique is. And am I right on that? Russia, or is it one of the other European countries? Okay. Yeah, yeah. And then also, when it comes to kids in particular, them
Yeah, yeah.
lifting
And
early
also
on is
China
usually
as well.
not a
I mean, they
huge
start
risk
them at
because they
age
just
5 or
cannot
something.
generate that force. When you tell a kid, "Oh, pick this up," and they feel and it's too heavy, they're like, "Nope, that's not happening." They just are disinterested.
Yeah. I think there's a whole, I mean, I don't want to sound callous when I say this, but a lot of the time, if we just peel back a lot of the misconceptions about training with youths, we'll say they cannot pick up an 8 kilo kettlebell for a goblet squat, right? No, don't do that. That's bad. But you can do a push up where you lift on average 2/3, 70% of your body weight. I'm pretty certain that's more than 8 kilos. I'd be concerned if it wasn't, right? So what's the difference there? In reality, adding that little 8 kilo kettlebell is not probably any. And then, also, they can't do that, but they can sprint, which the impact forces and stuff of sprinting are just astronomical compared to lifting a goblet squat or a kettlebell swing. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying they're already doing stuff that's way harder than lifting a certain amount, right? Now, when it comes to kids, we need to realize that first it has to be fun. Let's not create a terrible relationship with fitness before they've really even started. They need to be as varied and fun as humanly
Can
possible.
we
The
say that a little
worst
louder for the
thing
people
that
in the
is
back with their
prevalent
club
in youth
coaches in their
training is
ear?
over specialization. Okay, my kid's going to play baseball, so they do nothing but that. That's one way to almost, yeah, yeah, I know. It's one way to almost guarantee a short career if they even get that far, because they'll probably give it up because they're miserable anyway. And also, different sports offer different things. Like baseball, great. Okay. If they're in a team sport, that teaches them team dynamics, like the importance of working with teammates and collaborating and things like that. But there's also going to be a point where maybe they should also do a solo sport to learn responsibility And like everything is on you. That's important to learn also, because there are times in life where we have to work together, and there are times in life when everything falls on us, and they need to learn both skill sets there. But no sport is balanced. There's like there that doesn't exist, which is why everyone who plays a sport professionally also has to train the aspects that the sport doesn't, because otherwise they don't last very long. So no individual sport is balanced. So the best thing you can do is keep them as a multi-sport individual for as long as possible, not just for their enjoyment, but for building the broadest foundation of skills humanly possible. Because a lot of the best athletes were multi-sport athletes for a very long time, and that's not a coincidence, because there are things that you learn in one sport that may actually make you a better player in that other sport. Kid plays football, he has to learn all the plays and things like that. Maybe he ends up playing basketball, but guess what? The skills that he learned to learn all those plays in football are also really handy for learning all the plays in basketball, for example. There's so much that kind of goes unsaid in that regard. And then we can also give them just a broader brace to get them some longevity. So keep it fun and keep it varied. And then the other thing that you kind of already mentioned is that movement quality is probably the most important thing, but we do need to have a little bit more, should we say, leeway with kids, because they are still on the very low levels of motor development. That's just how we work. A kid is going to do that goblet squat, and the knees are going to be moving around, and the posture is going to be going. That's okay. That's why limiting the load at the start is important, because they need to learn these movement patterns. And unlike us, maybe if we get into it as an adult, sure, many of us aren't active enough, but we've had more years on this planet moving around, learning how to stabilize and move our body. So we probably pick it up a little bit quicker than they do. They've still got, they're like Bambi on ice, for want of a better way of putting it, right? So we need to expect probably a lower level of movement quality, which means all that means that we need to moderate the loads a bit more and keep the movements very simple, like a goblet squat or a kettlebell swing or a body weight lunge or like a TRX or an inverted row, a press up, a dumbbell press. They don't need to be, no kid needs to be doing power cleans and back squats early on. Like those are exercises that even most athletes don't need, to be brutally honest with you. Like very few athletes no one needs to back squat in truth, right? No one actually needs to power clean, for example. So we shouldn't be enforcing those complex movements on kids either. It should be, what is the absolute simplest movement I can use to build this movement pattern? Because that's what you're doing with youths. You're not getting them jacked, you're not getting them stronger, you're not getting them faster, whatever. All that stuff will come with time. But if they don't have good movement patterns, then they're not going to get anywhere. And when you teach them how to squat, how to hinge, how to lunge, how to press, how to pull early on, they get that nailed down early on in their career. They've got all these productive training years in front of them that others don't have, who don't do that skill work. And then quite often what happens is people who don't do that foundational work have to go back at a much later age, usually already injured or hitting the plateau or whatever, and have to do all that learning process anyway, except now they have bad habits to get rid of. When you've got a kid, that's the one time ever you're going to have a blank canvas. Never done a squat before. Cool. Let's do it right from the first time, because there's one thing that's harder than teaching a good habit is unteaching a bad habit. That's way harder. So let's not put ourselves in a scenario where we have to do that. So again, the same lesson that we were kind of espousing to earlier about taking pride in the quality of your work actually becomes even more important with those youth athletes. And like, make them execute everything to the absolute highest technique that they can, which will need a little bit more wiggle room there. And the load doesn't really matter that much. What matters is they're having fun, they're moving better, and they're probably then progressing on the field in whatever sport it is that they might be playing. But again, at that point in their life, the things that give them the biggest benefits long term are absolutely not the things that give them the most benefit in the short term. Like, again, this is a pet peeve, so I apologize, but the youth training camps where they take all these kids who've been doing like sensible programs for a couple of years and they peak them. They just have them do nothing but like plyometrics and spled sprints and all this fancy looking stuff that, yes, it peaks your power production in a short period of time. Cool. We've already discussed how that isn't actually you getting better. And then they're like, well, look, his 40-yard dash time is now lower. Cool. All you did was take the 3 years that those other coaches did, laying that base, and just go, cool, let's do a 4 week peaking program to convince you that my program is the best one out there. Now you're going to give me money. Like, that's, I hate it, and it exists, and it's very prevalent, and I don't like that. So if something, and we can say this is true for adults, right? But if it's even more true for youths, probably, if someone is promising you like instantaneous, super fast results for your kids, be really skeptical. I'm not saying they don't
Yeah, and
exist,
at least
but
from
usually
experience
the
with
things that
working
get you
with
really fast
youth
results
for
now are
like
not the things that get
7
you
years at
good
my
or
former
lasting
gym,
results, would be the
like when they
biggest
do
like
get
piece of
super
advice
fast
I would put
results,
out there.
it's not the coach. It's them hitting puberty and being more coordinated than their peers so that they end up doing more with the basics than their peers do. So for a coach to even take credit on that would be like so messed up on so many levels. But that's the name of the game with strength coaches in professional and college sports, right? It's look at me, I did this.
Yeah, for sure. And it's what's the coolest methods, what a lot of, and a lot of it is like, oh well, this method looks super cool or super advanced, my kid should be doing this. And it's like, the sad reality is, and this is not just youth, this is all of us, really productive, sustainable training is really quite boring. I'm sorry, but it is. If it's really fancy and looks great on Instagram and makes you like, oh my God, I have to try this, this, and this, it's probably not going to work long term. I'm sorry. Like, all the best results are gained with the bare basics done monotonously with the absolute highest quality of work. And like I said, that's probably even more important for your kids than it is for you, because there's more stuff you can mess up for them in the long term. Like, we're already kind of reasonably built and robust. We've got movement patterns there already. They are literally just starting off in their physical development. Like, I'm sure you can say the same. We've met plenty of adults that have been messed up at a pretty young age in terms of their movement and their skills, that type of thing. Things like ballet or gymnastics, like asking too much of them too early on and having shoulder problems, all this type of stuff. Like, we can do genuine damage and we can do genuinely amazing things if we're just willing to bite our ego down a little bit and say, yeah, this might make me look like I know a lot right now as a coach, but
Yep.
actually the
And that
stuff
is
that's
a
best for them is
perfect way
this
to
really
cap this
basic stuff
because
that,
I think that's the
is
best
not going to
message
get
to end
a
on
lot
is
of
like
attention, but
basically you
the
guys all
results
just
do
eventually
speak
want
for
to get to that
themselves.
point where it's same shit, different shirt. Like John Goodman says, it's like you're just doing the same shit, different shirt. But before we head out, I want to make sure that people know where to find you because I'm dead sure that people are like, okay, Tom's awesome. He knows a lot of stuff. Where the heck do I find him?
Yeah, sure. So I'm terrible at this stuff, man. So I've got an Instagram, it's at Phoenix Performance Training. That's where I'm at. A lot of my stuff also gets posted on the Elite FTS channel as well. So that would be another place to follow. But I'm on Instagram. They're posting informational, educational content, that type of thing, on the Elite FTS YouTube channel and their Instagram as well. A lot of my stuff goes up on there. For example, we're posting videos that, we've taken from the seminars and the workshops and stuff that we've done like that. 2 weeks ago, we posted like a 45-minute section on like breathing and bracing, for example. That I
And
think is
you
a
guys
really
don't have to go
interesting
searching for
topic that we
that.
can
It's
all
all
do
going to be
better
down
on.
in the
So
show notes
there
or
is
the
also a cool
description, wherever
place
the
to
heck
kind
you
of
are
see
watching
what
or
I'm putting
listening.
out as well. But
Now,
yeah,
as a thank
Instagram
you
for
to
the most
Tom,
part.
if at any point you guys heard anything where you had somebody pop in your head and you're like, damn, they really need to hear this, go ahead and send it their way. They'll be thankful you did, and so will we. All right. Thank you for tuning in all the way through. I'll see you guys next time. But until then, go kick some ass. Later.